Well, Ms. Kim Puri, I'm Operations Manager here at SIG. I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar entitled The Pulse of Procurement. We are right at the top of the hour, and I'm going to get started. We will have folks continuing to dial in. And the first thing I'd like to do is go through a few introductory slides and remind you that our Global Executive Summit is coming up October 27th through 29th in Huntington Beach, California. The location is an event, and I really want to urge you and remind you to register. If you or somebody in your company, or if you, rather, are not able to join us in Huntington Beach, please suggest that somebody else in your company go ahead and join us there. We have a membership loyalty program, and this is a program that has been up and running for a little while now. This is where you accumulate points simply for attending a SIG event, whether that be a virtual event or live event. You accumulate points. We track that for you, and you go on to sig.org and look at your point accumulation. For those points, you can redeem them for prizes. All of that information is spelled out on the website. And I want to remind you that if for any reason you are not able to accept a prize, you can choose from a number of charitable organizations to donate your prize to. So be sure to check that out from time to time and take advantage of that. Sort of our little way of saying thank you for continuing to be loyal members and participate in our events. Work is really a fantastic place for you to post job openings. We have jobs of all levels as well as internship opportunities, and this is where you're front and center, posting jobs directly to the folks who you are most interested in hiring to fill those openings. So please remember us and log on to the website to post your jobs on sig.org. Social media at SIG are very active in all things social media, whether that be through LinkedIn and chats and posts or Facebook or Twitter. We love Twitter. And please feel free to tweet highlights and snippets from today's webinar. We also have a SIG blog, so if you've got content that you would like to contribute, please go ahead and reach out to us there as well. And of course, our peer-to-peer program. This is a long-standing SIG program, and it's really, really valuable. This is where you can pose a question and have your peers who are right there in the trenches with you dealing with the same topics and struggles and finding solutions, all of the same problems that you are struggling with as well. And we send out those peers, collect the data, and that information is sent right back to the person asking the question. Really great resource for connecting with your peers and getting your questions answered. Our web series, of course, is a 1-hour event. It takes place 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It does require pre-registration, as you probably know, and open to everybody, buy and sell side. We do record our webinars, and you can go ahead and log into our SRC, pull up those webinars, and use those for educational research purposes moving forward. We have the next webinar coming up on October 27th. That's brought to us by Beeline. Follow-up will be September 3rd by PeopleTicker and September 8th by Canon Business Process Services. So please be sure to register for our upcoming webinars. Now, our SIG teleconference, Town Hall teleconference program is a little bit different from a webinar. These also require registration. They're also a 1-hour event, but they take place 1 time per month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This is open buy-side participation only. We do provide an open mic, and we never record them. So we really develop an open and organic platform for conversation and dialogue for the buy-side members to log in, chat, and really get a little deeper into conversation than they might otherwise. Our next one is coming up September 9th, and that's brought to us by Tom Ciardello from Options Clearing Corporation, entitled Owning the Procurement Function. That's going to be a really lively event, so please don't wait to register because space can be limited. Regional Roundtable program are really important and fantastic events. Our symposiums are a really full day. It's more like a one-day mini summit, and you have the benefit of breakout sessions, keynote speakers, many networking opportunities and learning opportunities. Our next one coming up is in Columbus, Ohio on September 17th, from New York on October 15th, and the San Francisco Bay Area on November 10th. Those also require pre-registration, and you can do that on sig.org. Now, our regional roundtable events are a little bit shorter days in general, generally 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., also featuring a presentation followed by smaller, more intimate roundtable discussion, allowing you to dive a little bit deeper into the topics at hand. We are really excited to be across the pond to London on September 16th. So if you've got colleagues or brands of your company who are in the London area, please reach out and suggest that they attend this regional roundtable. It's going to be a truly fantastic event. London will be followed by Washington, D.C. on October 1st and Raleigh, North Carolina on November 5th. And we are going down under, super exciting, back to Sydney, Australia on November 11th. So there again, in the Sydney area, please reach out to them and suggest that they also attend our regional roundtable on November 11th. Our Global Executive Summit is coming up very quickly, October 27th through 29th. Beautiful location, and you can see the brands here that you will be with. They are truly phenomenal. This is where we bring up to 450 decision makers together for 3 days of really intense learning, networking, sharing, almost 50 breakout sessions. It's always a 70% buy-side to 30% sell-side ratio. It's a non-commercial environment, and I think that you really shouldn't miss if you're at all possible. So please do log on, register for the event, book your travel, book your hotel. It can often book at the hotel, so we don't want you to do that. We love when everybody is in-house. So please don't do that. Our City program. This is a real labor of love here at SIG. It's something that everybody's been working very hard on, and it is coming very close to fruition. It's an online certification program, and the certification will be good for 5 years. Please keep eyes and ears open for the official launching of this program, and if you've got any input, any thoughts around this, please reach out to us and share those. Our outreach program is where we're really reaching out to the universities. We're connecting emerging graduates who are coming into our field and connecting them with companies. We've been really successful with this so far. We've connected students with companies for jobs as well as internships. Both have been really happy, so please reach out to us and let us know if you're interested in making those connections with the supply chain professionals of tomorrow. Now, lead of today's presentation brought to us by Zycus, entitled Pulse of Procurement. We have 2 presenters with us today. We're really happy to have Ian and Richard Waugh with us. Ian is the Vice President of Sourcing and Vendor Management at PHH Mortgage. He is an accomplished executive leader in the automotive and financial services sectors. He has a wide range of functional experience in diverse global markets, along with an MBA with high distinction from the University of Michigan. He focuses on achieving excellence in operations and strategic sourcing, where he leads by example and a vision and an appreciation for results and values. Joining Ian is Richard Waugh, Vice President, Corporate Development at Zycus. Richard started his career as a marketing and finance manager with GE. Richard has evolved into a business leader and entrepreneur, where he helped launch the first online marketplace for sourcing and procurement, as well as co-founding one of the first software-as-a-service providers. With regards to supply management, Richard leveraged his years of knowledge and experience and worked with the Aberdeen Group as an industry analyst. Now he is with us, with Zycus, and he's also with us today. We're looking forward to hearing him speak on the Pulse of Procurement, and thank you both for being here. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Ian and Richard.
That's Kim. Pleasure to be with you today, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Ian with his wealth of experience to share those insights. So as I share the content from our study, I'm going to ask Ian to weigh in as well with his perspectives and insights on some of the key topics.
Thanks, Richard.
Of procurement that we're going to cover today.
Very much, Richard.
Having you, Ian. And a quick word about Zycus, and I'll get right into the core of a Pulse of Procurement study that we're going to cover today. But just to let you know, a way of context how Zycus approaches the market, we are a software provider. We provide an integrated suite of source-to-pay tools. And we look at sourcing and procurement across both strategic and operational aspects. So the more strategic elements, of course, being able to analyze at a very granular level spend data to identify opportunities that then get executed through the automated e-sourcing process. And at the culmination of those negotiations with the preferred suppliers, putting those agreements in place through a contract management capability, then making them searchable. Likewise, onboarding those preferred vendors through a supplier management tool that capture all the information about the suppliers and enable ongoing performance measurement of suppliers are coming up to the negotiated SLAs and KPIs, if that's not too many acronyms already. We also then segue once the agreements are in place onto the operational side, so procure to pay, requisitioning, management, catalog management for indirect goods principally, and as well as the back-end process of then settling those orders through the invoice management processing aspect. So a comprehensive suite of source-to-pay tools, that's where we focus. That means procurement is really our sole constituency. So we have clearly a vested interest in periodically taking the pulse of procurement and leaders such as Ian and his colleagues to really understand what are the key goals, what are the challenges, what are the pain points, how are they performing, what are some of the key benchmarks, and what are the trends as regards technology adoption in the marketplace. So with that, we are going to focus on sharing with you some brand new data from our Pulse of Procurement 2015 study. This is newly published content. It is an annual study that we do, as implied by the name, annual once a year. That enables us to get some analysis to see where things are heading in the field of procurement. And that's the content I want to share with you today. So very quickly, just so that you understand sort of the demographics and the methodology behind the study, it is a broad-based survey. Over 400 responses, so very statistically significant and valid. And my guess, it does skew more towards larger organizations that tend to be earlier adopters of leading-edge procurement technology, for example. So there's a representation at all levels. 80% or more have annual revenues of $500 million or more. And global in nature, our respondents also do tend to skew more towards the Americas, so about 70% in Americas, North and South America, but representation from other parts of the globe as well. Most of the respondents, better than 3/4, are represented from the ranks of procurement managers, directors, VPs, and CFOs. So folks in the know, such as yourselves participating in our webinar today, that really can give us that accurate pulse of actually what's happening out in the. So how we went about the study. Start kind of at the top level view. One of the more interesting questions we asked is kind of put yourself in the C-suite for a moment, be it the CEO, the CFO, the COO, and back what you think their view is of your procurement organization. I would say overall the results are pretty encouraging. Think about the fact that better than 80% say the C's view of procurement is that it's either important or critical to the business strategy and of moderate, at least moderate to high value. So relatively small minority that say it's periphery or strictly a back office function or those kinds of things. And I'm not sure that this was the same a few years back, that certainly as we've gone forward, the C-suite view of procurement is that it's more and more strategic and more value to the organization. So I think there's a great point, too, Ian, for me to ask you to weigh in and take a look at your own organization. What would you say the C-suite's view of procurement is, PHH Mortgage, and how has it changed in recent years and why?
I would agree with that the C-suite would look at procurement today at PHH as important to strategy. The reason that is not at the highest level is we started a fairly new team built out from the ground up. We began a very strong focus on strategic sourcing, and so we're not yet at the highest level, I think mostly because of our maturity as a function. Other dynamics within the particular mortgage industry has been increasing criticality from a couple of focuses. One is clearly cost management has been paramount as volumes have dropped in overall industry. And number two, we've had organizations like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB, mandate that vendor management needs to become part of vendors or banks' ability. So that has certainly driven a big part of the change in the last 3 to 5 years.
Interesting. And so some real market forces at work here, whether it's the diminished volume and therefore a focus on cost management or regulatory.
Exactly. I think they both more or less happened as a result of the financial crisis. So you see them obviously go down, but at the same time we've had new regulatory agencies scrutinize how well banks and lenders in general are managing their vendors as an extension of themselves, essentially.
But thanks for that, Ian. And I should mention, I neglected to mention earlier that, consistent with the title of our study, The Pulse of Procurement, we're going to take your pulse, pulse of our audience throughout the presentation. We'll have a few poll questions for you to weigh in on as well. So be ready for that because we constantly want to be taking the pulse. But it's certainly a good start here, encouraging that regardless of what forces are at work, and I think, Ian, you hit on a key one, that during the economic downturn, C-suite became much more attuned to what was going on in procurement because at that level they have to manage the bottom line, and if you can't grow the top line, you better look at the margin, cost side of the equation. So, but encouraging in that that type of acknowledgement, support from the C-suite critical to procurement success as we start out here. So the next question that we was really trying to get a gauge for what are some of the top priorities for procurement, and we asked respondents to pick their top 3. So there's a variety of responses listed here, but probably not too surprisingly, cost savings, which has been that traditional measure of procurement effectiveness, comes out right at the top about 80% of the time. Followed closely by process efficiency or productivity. I'll note that in some of our responses, one that was included was speed and cycle time reduction at 20%, which could kind of club together with process efficiency because cycle time is a way of measuring process efficiency. So those are a very close 1 and 2, cost savings and a focus on efficiency and process, followed by things like supplier performance, supply risk management, and improved compliance. And you see some of the other initiatives that are not quite as high, but things that kind of come on the radar screen, I would say, just in recent years, like focusing on not just cost management, but how can procurement through supplier innovation programs, for instance, help support sales growth, revenue growth, market share, kinds of things. But one of the things that strikes me, Ian, is overall these are the top ones are the more traditional procurement measures, and certainly the ones that lend themselves the most to measurement and directly controllable, if you will, by procurement. So we can control cost negotiations, we can control the process and impact that through automation initiatives and those kinds of things. So I would love to, again, Ian, ask for your perspective on, relative to your organization, what do you see as the top priorities?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually pretty consistent in terms of what we're certainly focused, number one, on cost savings. and then a range of ideas, whether it's consolidating our vendor base, leveraging the volumes, obviously, or in certain sectors, introducing champion challenger. But being that, we've got a mix of both the performance aspect in terms of especially vendor scorecards, and also building out our technology foundation for things like spend analytics and contract management, because the tools weren't in place here when we began sourcing vendor management, and that's something that we set up as a priority for this year. And that phase one should be something we're able to complete before the end of the year. And then we will look into what other priorities we would have for next year in terms of that technology. And then from a data flow perspective, it's just also the of managing a vast volume of contract renewals and being able to segregate those that are truly strategic versus those that need to be done but don't require the same level of attention from a strategic sourcing team.
And what I hear you saying too is that you're going to have some of those same overarching goals like cost savings as most any procurement organization would, but you've put a priority behind the enablers, such as technology enablement, that's going to achieve some of those goals, right?
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, if when we're setting up our strategies going forward, it's been a lot of work to try to get our arms around the spend and create our own taxonomy of that spend to align better with the business and give them the vision of where we think there's opportunities to leverage the spend across business units. With this tool, we're really anticipating that ability to not only share the data very quickly with the business owners and finance, also to formulate plans in advance of a budget cycle is going to be a huge gain for us, because you go a little less from the selling idea to owning a plan for the next year.
It all starts with visibility, just as you say. So very interesting perspective. And I want to segue to our first poll question. So again, we want to take the pulse of our audience as well. So we're on this topic. The question that we'd like to pose is, which of those following? So I've kind of picked some of the top responses that through in our pulse study. But which of these would you say is your top priority, your procurement organization in the next 12 months? So be A, cost savings. You see the options on your right, on the right-hand portion of your screen. So we'll give you about 45 seconds to think about this, so no pressure. But is it A, cost savings, or B, are you looking more at those process efficiencies or productivity gains? Is it C, improving supplier performance, or D, is it a supply risk management imperative that you're focused on? That each choice would be improve compliance, things like contract compliance, for example, or something else altogether would be the F or other option. So I think we're just about to close the poll now. And I'm going to limb and predict cost savings is still going to be the winner. And just waiting for the other results, and expect that, not a surprise, so 69% did cite cost savings as one. So I think the conclusion is sort of, that's inevitable, that's a given. So it's going to be on most performance screens for the permanent leadership out there. So for it, but I think the other message too, probably Ian, you'd concur, is that there's no need for these other things too. You're expected to have an efficient process and be able to measure performance, especially for your most strategic suppliers, and things like assurance of supply. Critical in the risk management area. Your thoughts on the poll results, Ian?
I mean, it does resonate, and I think the one point that this all hits on very clearly is that we're expected to return an amount of what's invested in the team. So I think the efficiency is also part of how you run the organization in terms of making sure that those cost savings really are clearly a very high return on the overall investment the company makes in the procurement team at large and in technology that supports that vision.
Excellent, terrific perspective. And so we know we have our work cut out for us as procurement, right? We know what some of the top goals are. We wanted to look at what kind of resources most organizations expect to get in order to execute against that mission. And we compare the results in this pulse study from 1 year over year. And I guess some good news here as well in that compared to 2014, as we get procurement budgets, either in terms of the overall budget, capital budget that's allocated to the procurement group, or just in terms of headcount, FTEs that are allocated, overall results indicate sort of either flat or slightly increasing budgets. So, as we look across those functions in the organization, that's not necessarily true. And procurement, probably by comparison, is doing relatively well from a budget standpoint, but still, conclusion I think you'd have to reach is that with relatively flat budgets and improving economic conditions, at least for most U.S.-based companies that are driving growth, organizations, that's going to mean sort of doing more with the same. It certainly implies a need to improve productivity and efficiency in order to accommodate that kind of growth. And again, I'd be interested in how does this relate to your organization? What have you seen the trends in recent years, and why are those changes happening?
Yeah, for us in particular, actually, we will be increasing on all three of those axes, both from the total procurement budget amount given to capital budgets and then the total FTE count. But that had a lot to do with the fact that we were a very mature organization, and we were building up in terms of our category management skill sets. So the analytics behind that, the formalization of a procurement transactional team, all required additional headcounts. But the other factor here was that we centralized earlier the entirety of the source center management that might have been in silos in the past together under one team that's responsible for a larger scope of spend. And so, there's an increasing budget, but with that comes an increasing expectation to achieve, 3 to 5x ROIs. So I think those two things tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's a great benchmark, 3 to 5x return on investment. So bottom line is procurement may be getting more resources, even if they're sort of being allocated. There may be existing resources that are now, like in your case, being centralized, but it's not a blank check. The investment is given with an expectation of a return.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually segues into the next benchmark that we took here is what are those expected returns? What are the cost savings objectives that folks are looking at? It strikes me that they're pretty aggressive. If as we look at the responses, of course, there's a distribution across various ranges. You represented here most in the 0 to 10% range, but an average 8% on total spending is pretty aggressive. It strikes me that to some extent these targets are based on what we did experience throughout the, let's say 3 to 5 years during and coming out, just starting to come out of the economic downturn where, price deflation. So savings were certainly on the table to be had. And I think, it's good to see the optimism, but I think there's, sort of a dose of reality here to say for some organizations, how long do you expect to be able to sustain those kind of savings levels? So, Ian, once again, as regards savings, really be interested in you help us explore the methodology. So I think one of the things that is a little bit difficult to pin is everyone may have a different definition of what constitutes savings. You know, cost savings, cost reduction, do set specific percentage or savings targets for reduction of evidence or both, and how do you go about reporting and tracking savings? So I'd really be interested if you could shed some light on that aspect, which I do think sort of varies a lot from one company to the next.
I agree, and I think there's always going to be a lot of debate, especially when it comes to cost savings. Is it going to include cost avoidance, or is it only going to focus on hard savings? When we go about our planning, we have a couple of targets, so we break those two out first of all. But I think the more interesting aspects of it is when you have a lot of new spend in a company, folks in the finance area may look at anything related to new spend as something that is completely associated with cost avoidance. But if someone is looking at this from the perspective of just the timing of when it enters into that particular situation, if we don't negotiate a new deal very well up front, that leads to an opportunity. There's an existing spend on that particular contract to reduce the spend, and that would be considered hard savings from a financial perspective. But it may be kind of short-sighted to necessarily segregate things between cost avoidance and hard savings, because in fact I think the organization has to make sure that we develop a sort of a playbook where we have our things validated by the financial group. They recognize both what they would hard savings, but they also see the value behind cost avoidance.
That's a great perspective, and Ian, actually, I think you helped me explain one of the what seems to be kind of an anomaly in the data, because I was looking at the fact that 9% that say their savings targets are 15% or better. I mean, there's 2% that say they're going after 25% or more, and I'm kind of wondering, where did you get that?
I mean, I think that my view on that would be probably depending on the particular company and the fact that they may or may not be seeing categories that have been thoroughly and rigorously sourced in the past. We do have opportunities where we've seen dramatic savings in a particular category, but I would agree with you that overall numbers like that are not something that would be sustainable. It just that in my experience, I think the majority of the folks did put it in the 6 to 10% range, which you can certainly achieve that in a large amount of categories, but it really does depend a lot on your in one instance the maturity of the category and how well sourced it's been in the past, and just the dynamics of the marketplace. Some commodity-driven categories have obviously lent themselves very well to reduce pricing. The same happened with lumber in many instances, but and those generalizations are sometimes hard to extrapolate because lumber may have gone down in certain areas, but specific roles may actually be very hard to fill, and those tend to have wage inflation.
I think a great point, Ian, and to an extent, the savings opportunity will be a function of the relative maturity of that particular procurement organization. So if it's like a brand new procurement organization and everything is sort of a greenfield opportunity, the potential savings may be much greater, for instance. And that was one of the things we wanted to measure as well on the topic of procurement maturity. Ask the respondents to sort of tell us where they are on that journey across this continuum that starts on one end with just getting started, starting to get some early wins. So maybe we're either now launching a transformation or we're still sort of in status quo, and then next of the evolution gaining momentum. So probably sort of doing the basics, but doing them fairly well. Moving forward, extend the influence, which often means increasing procurement's influence or spend under management especially as regards some of the categories that in the past, as you mentioned, Ian, procurement may not have had access to or influence over. And then the next step is now we can generate systematic wins, so establish processes that are really fully automated and therefore repeatable, sort of the last step to the here, which is leading edge global best in class. And of course, only 3% said it has planted the flag and said mission accomplished, we're already best in class. And we see a normal distribution across the other various stages here. So that scale in mind, Ian, how would you assess the maturity of your procurement organization? And maybe you could talk about how your procurement is organized. Do you align by, for instance, process, category, geography, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think what's remarkable to kind of see on this scale is our own transformation. I would have characterized us in 2013 as having our first early wins. We did very much gain momentum in 2014, so I would put us today in that extending influence and probably take us into 2016 because developing the systematic wins really means you've got very wide buy-in, not from the C-suite, which I think we've gotten to that point, but you've also got it across various stakeholders throughout the business. And to get to that point, in terms of your question on the alignment, what we've done is we've aligned our strategic sourcing directors, the single point of contact for the business channels, but they're made so that they're also aligned by spend categories so that they can develop utilization and still maintain a holistic view of spend across business units.
That's terrific. So you're well along your path, the journey to transformation, but work yet to be done, right?
And I think part of it will be as we gain grades and we show the opportunity and to work together in strategic planning, not just in here's an opportunity that we've proven potential savings, but rather plan ahead and invite vendors to help us develop more innovative solutions that are consistent with our business partners' strategic planning. That's when I think you really start to develop systematic wins.
Wins and above and beyond just cost savings. It may be
like you said, efficiency,
revenue growth, or client satisfaction, a whole host of things, right?
Reduce losses for sort of liabilities. There's a myriad of things that vendors can really bring their expertise to bear.
And Ian, this is quite love to pose to you before we get too much further into the presentation. And that question is, do you exclude any spend from procurement's baseline as out of scope for procurement? And the second part to that is, do you categorize any spend as non-addressable?
Yeah, we will have a benchmark coming up on spend under management, which I think is going to get to this point. But it's a good question because, typically what I've seen, and Ian, feel free to comment as well, is that it will certainly exclude non-discretionary spend. Things like is one of those two abilities that we deal with in life. Would be an example. Utilities, those kinds of things, things that aren't really sourceable categories typically do get excluded from the spend under management calculation as a best practice is what I've seen. Ian, your thoughts as well.
I agree with you. I'm not sure if I understood the nuance of out of scope versus non-addressable. For me, those are analysis. But I would agree with you that we do take the overall spend and we take out areas where we have absolutely no ability to influence it. So taxes is a classic case. Anything related to government licensing and so forth. We tend to also look at certain categories as maybe we keep them as addressable but less actionable. So we actually focus not just on what is addressable versus non-addressable. We then try to pare those down into actionable versus scale from low to high for the next year's strategic sourcing planning.
Right, and we will cover this benchmark, as I said, in a couple of minutes, Kim, but just to alert to jump ahead here, the spend under management average number that came out of our study was only about 53%, and it in fact was down by about 4% from last year's study. So while best in class tends to be about 85%, nobody really manages 100% of spend because those non-sourceable or discretionary categories I mentioned. But that says for most organizations there's a lot of room for growth, for opportunity. The average performance is only about 50%, but 85% would be a best-in-class target. So good. Now I'm going to pose a question, which would be poll question number 2. So on this topic of the procurement organization's maturity at the current state, again, you'll see that this is up here on your right-hand portion of the screen with the poll question, but the choices are, are you at the starting point, A, starting or early wins? Is it B, start to gain momentum now, beyond the starting gate? Or C, have you really begun to extend influence in getting better stakeholder buy-in to address some categories that maybe procurement historically didn't have much control or influence over? Or are you at that stage of D, kind of that systematic wins where you've got established and automated processes that are repeatable, or, have solved everything, kind of as I planted the flag and did victory as best in class, and I'm being somewhat facetious because I know that even those organizations would adopt a continuous improvement mindset. But interesting to just have everyone weigh in. I think we're about to close the poll now and tabulate the results, but just kind of figure out where we are. And as I said, Ian, you were kind of straddling C and D, right? Moving from extending influence into creating the systemic or systematic wins, right?
Yeah, I would put ourselves right now at C and moving towards D, exactly.
Yeah, okay, which is, as we see the results coming in now, pretty typical. So the majority are right in the middle. That's surprising. So, on the path, started the journey, but right in that middle stage, about 43% of extending the influence. It's about the same number that would report as best in class, 2% here, 3% in our study overall, but pretty similar results and a lot of good insights from you, Ian, on how to measure progress against some of those key milestones. So one for their input on that question as well. And I had to move forward, and this was the topic that we just were talking about, really, with the question from the audience around spend under management. So this is kind of sobering news, I think, if we look at the fact that the average performance is just about half, just barely over half of spend is really controlled or influenced directly by procurement, which would meet our definition of spend management. Certainly there's a healthy portion that are kind of knocking it out of the park, 12% with 80% or better under management. But the fact is that compared to our survey from just a year ago, spend under management number is actually trending downward from 57 to 53%. So kind of a little bit sobering in that respect. And as we've already talked about comparing spend under management then to cost savings, and the previous slide where we talked about what were your cost savings goals, this would be what you've actually achieved, cost savings. But once again, significant variability in what folks are reporting as cost savings. So at the top of the scale, 13% are getting 20% or more savings. And again, that may be, in fact, relatively more immature organizations that have so much potential because the categories really haven't been mined yet. But average, about 53% are in that sort of 10% or below, which would be fairly typical. So as we're on the topic of spend under management in particular, I'm interested to know, is this the kind of metric that you track, and if so, what's been the trend? Have you been able to get more influence or control or different categories of spend that are increasing that number? And if so, what strategies have helped you get that stakeholder buy-in for, procurement having a seat at the table, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, certainly because we've centralized vendor management, we've actually expanded our addressable spend significantly over the last couple of years. We are probably in that bucket roughly around 65 to 70%. Don't track it on a monthly basis. We tend to focus on that number more on an annual basis to say, let's reset and make sure our total spend and what we're managing is consistent with that goal of expanding that spend under management. But they are definitely categories that I would consider challenging, even though they may be addressable. A classic area might be legal. Spend a significant amount on legal fees. When you meet with stakeholders, they certainly have a lot of expertise that we're not able to match when it comes to understanding those are particular law firms and litigation, why those are the right ones for those particular jurisdictions and so forth. I think where there are times when we may let a spend under management, but necessarily addressable like it would be in some other categories.
For that, Ian, and while spend under management tends to be one of the leading indicators of the sourcing effectiveness in organization, our next one deals with not only can you source and negotiate the best contracts, but can you manage the demand, ensure that the spending is in compliance with those contracts. So this is our compliance benchmark. And again, a little bit sobering in that not much more than half the time is the spend in compliance with the contracts. Now, when we use a term like contract compliance, that's often interpreted as being able to ensure that the spending was done with the approved contracted vendor. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's price compliance with the contract for every purchase order that was raised, or that all the LAs are met. There can be a lot of different nuances. But again, interested in, is this a metric that you track, and what specific challenges have you faced with regard to contract compliance?
Yeah, I think you it in the sense that this is an area where I would think that even our compliance requires a clear definition, where I think we would in various ways. For example, we do closely track compliance versus our SLAs or adherence to company standards that are outlined in contracts. I think we're certainly building on the improved tracking to other aspects of contract compliance, such as price, such as making sure that all the bidders are trying to use our preferred network of vendors versus their own selection. So that's the challenge that we face, and I think it'll get easier to manage, especially as we incorporate the contract management module from Zycus, because of its ability to provide folks very quickly with insight of which are the vendors within a specific category, and to look up contracts much easier than they can today.
Right, that foundational and fundamental visibility, a starting point to ensure compliance, to make sure that stakeholders in the business have visibility of what contracts are in place as a way to drive compliance. So, at its point in our study, we looked at, does the C-suite think of procurement? What are some of the top priorities or goals for the procurement organization? Some key benchmarks to how procurement is performing. And, as a technology provider, now we get to something near and dear to my own heart is what are your plans for technology adoption across the different application spaces? So we'll walk through each one individually, but what we're measuring across each application space is, first of all, did the respondent, have they already invested in it, or do they plan to? The second circle, if you will, says, well, what type of solution are you using? Is it a home legacy system that you rolled your own and built it yourself? Are you using the incumbent ERP's capabilities, or have you opted for a best-of-breed point or suite type of solution? The last dimension, the measure here, is what type of technology solution you have in place. Would you rate that capability as really state-of-the-art, or sort of mid the curve, sort of average or behind the curve from a technology standpoint? So we start with spend analytics, and 73% say they already have it, and that, by the way, is the highest penetration. Not surprising, since if you're embarking on a transformation, spend visibility typically a great starting point. But there is a disparity here. So 73% have it, but only 13% say our capability is state-of-the-art. That means 60% of those that have it say we're not where we want to be just yet. So, we're going to delve into each one a little bit individually, but I'd like to get your thoughts on your technology evaluation process. So did you look, for instance, at these types of solutions, be it best-of-breed, suite solutions, point solutions, ERPs, or even consider building your own? And what were your criteria? How to decide to phase your technology deployments? If you could just talk about your technology strategy overall.
Yeah, I think very early on we decided not to build our own. We felt we could find it in the marketplace because we wanted to leapfrog into a world-class sourcing organization, and taking the time to build it out would have certainly delayed that effort. But we did end up looking at all different possible solutions, from best of breed to point to ERP, and our criteria really focused on, number one, the cost. Some of these solutions have significant upfront costs, but also ongoing costs were a key driver in evaluating some of these systems and deciding that they were not the right solution because they would charge per transaction and so forth. Second criteria that we looked at was the user interface, the ease of use, because we felt that the adoption of that technology would really be key to its overall value, and the easier the option, the sooner we would have folks across business looking at this as something that was worth the investment. And the element was really, is the solution holistic, in the sense that we did have a preference for a single platform after looking at these other best-of-breed type solutions, because to avoid data duplication and ability to look at a view of a vendor, have to open and switch different systems to get the complete view of the vendor, but kind of have this one view of the vendor very quickly accessible. And that was one of the big points we saw when we did decide on the Zycus system.
Checklist, I think, for anyone in the market as a technology buyer that you've just outlined for us, Ian. So very much for that. And we move to the different application space. So that was spend analytics. Contract management is the second highest. Already adopted or already invested. So 71% say they have some form of a contract management solution, but here in pretty low satisfaction. So just 12% that they're currently at state of the art. It also says we're middle of the pack or behind the curve as we look at that. So that's contract management. Just continuing through the sort of the end-to-end suite approach. E-sourcing, interestingly, has the highest penetration of a best-of-breed toolkit. So better than 50% have either a point solution or a suite from a third-party best-of-breed provider, as opposed to some other spaces that have a higher penetration of an ERP type solution, for example. And probably not coincidentally, e-sourcing also has one of the highest ratings applied to a state-of-the-art. So best of breed equals state-of-the-art, in this case at 18% for e-sourcing. With regards to procure-to-pay, this remains probably the biggest ERP stronghold. So 46% say they're using their ERP module for procure-to-pay currently, but almost as many, and a growing trend, is 40% using either suite-based or a best-of-breed point solution specific for procure-to-pay. And this one, not surprisingly, has the lowest incidence of the your own approach, due in part to the complexities around procure-to-pay, the number of different processes involved in requisition, PO, and payment, and the level of integration into financial systems as well. And just kind of concluding findings on the technology adoption, here is supplier management is interesting as an emerging space that's been earmarked for prioritized investment. So this one has the highest rating percent that said they plan to make investments specifically in space. And also interesting to me that it had the lowest penetration of ERP. And I think the conclusion that the market has reached is, yes, every ERP has a vendor master, but vendor master does not equal supply management. You know, a lot of cases that means we've got bare minimum that it takes to get somebody's invoice processed through accounts payable in our vendor master, but we want a lot more information about suppliers and about their quality certifications, insurance ratings, financial results, lots of different things that people are focused on in the area of supplier management as well. So a lot of growth potential. That has the lowest percentage of the percent that say they're state-of-the-art. So lots of planned investment, lots of growth in space. So in wrapping up our view on technology here, Ian, anything else that sort of jumps out at you or sort of maps to your technology strategy?
I'd say that the supplier information, when you mentioned that it was 11% state-of-the-art, it just kind of conveys, we're also implementing the supplier information management module from Zycus, but it challenges that I see, certainly in the financial services, is just having a better integration of, and this will be a third-party information around risk and events that would trigger risk alerts, be a natural disaster, a bankruptcy, problems, lawsuits. All of the information is, I think, a challenge for the solutions that are out there today. That become part of the integrated Zycus solution would be, a future improvement.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Ian. And Kim, I know we're short on time, and I'm going to skip the last poll question here today just to kind of share the last piece of content, which is technology adoptions. We talked a lot about technology, and the simple fact of the matter is, unless it gets adopted, unless people are using it, it won't deliver the result. And so overall, I think kind of tepid results if you look at the fact that the only area with greater than 50% adoption is by the enterprise or corporate procurement group. You can argue it's sort of mandatory that group would use any new technology. And lower levels of adoption, when you get out to the business unit level procurement functions, are lowest yet when it's end-user stakeholders. And there's a direct correlation with higher adoption levels at within each of these constituent groups, 20 to 30% higher adoption for the top performers, the ones that are delivering highest savings results, for example, versus the lowest performers. So in wrapping up today, this is the type of thought leadership that we like to share with the market as a way to keep pulse of what's going on from leaders and visionaries such as Ian. So glad that you could join us today. this is a preview just to let you know. We're kind of tapping the insights of the new age super CPO, this Cape Crusader here for procurement. And stay tuned for insights and benchmarks that will come up with. Look at that CPO function. What do they care about? How are they measured, et cetera? That we do actively as regards thought leadership is we have an annual conference called Horizon that we're a forum for sharing practices and networking amongst the thought leaders in the space. It's October 4th, 6th at Reynolds Plantation in Georgia. So look that up and hopefully come and join us for that event as well. And really thank Ian again, you for joining today and sharing those great insights and perspectives. And certainly open to addressing any questions that anyone may have that we possibly didn't get to today as well. And thanks to you as well, Kim, and everyone at SIG.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we clearly could have gone, another 30 minutes talking about this discussion, and your content has been fantastic. So I really want to thank both Ian and Richard for being with us today. I want to remind everybody, as Richard mentioned, please reach out to him or Ian with questions. You will all receive a copy of the deck, and as always, we do record and house these recordings in our SRC, so of course you can always circle back to that. And just really want to thank you both for being here. It was a really great hour. Thank you for spending the time with us, and we are looking forward to having you back again. And please have a great day. I think that concludes today's webinar, so thank you very much for being here today.